What you call reality feels solid, undeniable, and final, but that feeling is exactly what keeps it in place. You look around, you see your circumstances, your results, your limitations, and you assume this is the truth of your life. But what if it isn't truth at all? What if it is only a reflection, an echo of what you have been consistently thinking, believing, and accepting as real? Every condition you experience right now has a history. It did not appear out of nowhere. It was shaped slowly and quietly by repeated assumptions. Not just the thoughts you say out loud, but the ones you accept as facts without questioning them. The quiet beliefs about who you are. The subtle expectations about what is possible for you. Over time, these inner patterns impress themselves so deeply that they begin to take form in the outer world. And when they finally appear, you call them reality. But here is where most people lose their power. The moment something shows up externally, they treat it as fixed. They begin to react to it, adjust to it, and even defend it. They say this is just how things are, and in doing so, they unknowingly agree to keep it alive. You must understand this clearly. Reality is not creating you. You are creating reality. What you see is not the cause, it is the effect. It is the result of past states of mind, past assumptions, past identifications. So if you continue to treat it as something permanent, you are only reinforcing the same cycle that produced it in the first place. Think of it like looking into a mirror. If you see something in the reflection that you don't like, you don't try to change the mirror, you don't argue with it, you don't fight it, and you certainly don't accept it as unchangeable. You understand that the reflection can only change when you change what stands before it. Reality works in the same way. It mirrors your inner state with complete precision. So when you ignore reality, you are not being irrational, you are being aware. You are recognizing that what is in front of you is only a delayed projection. It carries no authority over your future unless you give it that authority. The moment you stop reacting to it as if it is final, you begin to loosen its hold over you. This requires a shift in identity. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who is defined by circumstances, you begin to see yourself as the one who defines them. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start asking, what within me is this reflecting? That question alone changes everything, because it brings your attention back to the only place where real change is possible within. And once you understand that reality is a reflection, something powerful happens. You no longer feel trapped by what you see. You no longer feel the need to wait for conditions to improve before you feel better, think differently, or believe in something greater. You realize that the change must come first from you, because the truth is, reality has no choice but to follow the state you consistently occupy. Change the state and the reflection must change. Now consider what happens when your attention becomes fixed on what is wrong. Most people believe they are simply being realistic when they analyze their problems, revisit their failures, and constantly observe what is missing. They think that by studying their difficulties, they will somehow find a way out. But what they fail to see is that attention is not neutral, it is creative. Wherever your awareness rests, it gives life, it gives energy, and it gives continuity. So when you repeatedly focus on a problem, you are not solving it, you are sustaining it. You are feeding it with your attention, reinforcing it with your emotion, and confirming it with your belief. In that moment, you are aligning yourself with the very condition you wish to escape. And because your outer world reflects your inner state, it must continue to present you with more of the same. This is why many people feel stuck. They are trying to change their circumstances while remaining mentally and emotionally loyal to them. They wake up each day and immediately check what is wrong. They measure their progress by what has not changed. They tell themselves stories about why things are difficult, why things take time, why things never work out for them. And with each repetition, these stories become more convincing, more familiar, and ultimately more real. But you must begin to see the hidden pattern. It is not the problem itself that holds power, it is your continued awareness of it. Without your attention, it cannot sustain itself in your experience. It is like a fire that depends on fuel. Remove the fuel, and it must eventually fade. This does not mean you deny that something exists. It means you refuse to energize it. You refuse to let it occupy your mind as the dominant reality. You understand that what you consistently observe, you strengthen, and what you withdraw your attention from, you weaken. There is a discipline in this, a quiet but powerful discipline. It is the ability to redirect your awareness even when your senses are presenting you with something you do not prefer. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening?" you begin to ask, "What would I rather experience?" And then you deliberately place your attention there. This is where true control begins, not in forcing the outer world to change, but in choosing where your inner focus rests. Because your focus is not just observation, it is participation. You are always participating in the creation of your reality, whether you realize it or not. When you dwell on lack, you participate in lack. When you dwell on limitation, you participate in limitation. But when you shift your attention to what is desired, to what is possible, to what is already yours in assumption, you begin to participate in a different reality altogether. At first, this may feel unnatural. Your mind has been trained to react, to analyze, to return to familiar problems. But persistence is the key. Each time you withdraw your attention from what is unwanted and place it on what you choose instead, you are breaking an old pattern and forming a new one. And over time, this new pattern becomes your natural state. You are not here to fight your problems. You are here to outgrow them by no longer giving them your attention. Because the moment you stop feeding what is wrong, you make space for what is right to appear. What you focus on is what you become, and what you become is what your world reflects. At this point, you may begin to understand that ignoring reality is not an act of avoidance, but an act of authority. It is a decision, a quiet, firm refusal to let what is currently visible dictate what is ultimately possible. Most people are not controlled by reality itself. They are controlled by their reaction to it. They see something, they feel something, and immediately they accept it as truth. From that acceptance, they begin to think, speak, and act in ways that keep them bound to it. But you are not here to be governed by appearances. You are here to recognize that appearances are temporary, fluid, and entirely subject to change. When you ignore reality, you are not pretending it does not exist. You are simply withdrawing your agreement with it. You are no longer consenting to let it define you, limit you, or decide your future. Consider how often people allow a single moment to shape their identity. A failure becomes, "I am a failure." A delay becomes, "Nothing ever works for me." A rejection becomes, "I am not worthy." And from that point on, they carry these conclusions as if they are facts. They begin to live from them, expecting more of the same, and in doing so they recreate the very experiences they wish to escape. To ignore reality is to interrupt this pattern. It is to stand in the presence of a condition and say, "This does not determine who I am." It is to feel something and yet not be ruled by that feeling. It is to observe without absorbing. This is not easy, because the senses are persuasive, they present evidence, and they demand belief. But your power lies in choosing what you accept as true, regardless of what is shown to you. This is where discipline becomes essential. Not force, not struggle, but a steady commitment to a new inner position. You begin to define yourself from within rather than from without. Instead of letting circumstances tell you who you are, you decide who you are first and allow circumstances to follow. This shift changes everything. Because once you stop identifying with your current conditions, you also stop reacting from them. And when your reactions change, your entire experience begins to change. You no longer speak from lack, you no longer think from limitation, and you no longer act from fear. You operate from a different center, a center that is not touched by temporary appearances. Understand this clearly. The world will continue to present you with images that reflect your past. That is its nature. But you are not required to keep agreeing with those images. You are not required to keep confirming them with your attention, your emotion, or your identity. You can see them and still choose differently. And in that choice, something powerful happens. You begin to feel a separation between who you are and what you are experiencing. You realize that circumstances are not personal. They are simply expressions of past assumptions. And if they were created, they can be uncreated. So you stand firm, not in resistance, but in knowing. You remain loyal to your chosen identity, even when there is no visible proof. You continue to think from what you desire, rather than of what you lack. And little by little, the hold of the old reality begins to weaken. Because reality only has power when you agree with it. Withdraw your agreement, and it must change. Everything that appears in your world has its origin in a state you have occupied within yourself. Not occasionally, not accidentally, but consistently. Your inner state is not just a passing mood, it is the foundation from which your entire experience is formed. It is the silent position you return to when no one is watching, the assumptions you carry without effort, the identity you accept as natural. From this state, all things flow. Most people attempt to change their lives by altering external conditions. They rearrange circumstances, pursue opportunities, and chase outcomes, hoping that something outside will finally give them the feeling they desire. But this approach keeps them in a cycle of dependency, because the outer world is only ever responding. It is never initiating. It mirrors, it reflects, it echoes, but it does not lead. If you wish to change what is reflected, you must first change what is being projected, and that projection begins within you. It begins with how you see yourself, how you define your capabilities, how you interpret your worth, and what you quietly expect from life. These inner positions are not harmless, they are creative. They are shaping your experiences moment by moment, often without your awareness. So when you decide to change your inner state, you are not engaging in imagination for its own sake. You are selecting a new foundation. You are choosing a different version of yourself to inhabit. And once that choice becomes stable, once it feels natural and familiar, the outer world must begin to reorganize itself to reflect it. This is not something you force. It is something you allow through consistency. You do not need to convince the world to change. You only need to become the person for whom that change is already true. This is where many misunderstand the process. They wait for evidence before they believe, when in fact belief must come first. You must begin to feel as though what you desire is already a part of you, not as a distant hope, not as something you are trying to achieve, but as something you already are. This feeling is subtle, but it is powerful. It shifts your thoughts, your reactions, your decisions, and your expectations. And through these shifts, your reality begins to take on a new form. At first, there may appear to be no change. The outer world may continue to present the same images, the same conditions, the same limitations. But you must not be deceived by this delay. What you see is always the result of past states, not your present one. If you remain faithful to your new inner position, the reflection must eventually catch up. Think of it as planting a seed. The moment the seed is placed in the ground, the process has already begun, even though nothing is visible on the surface. If you were to dig it up every day to check its progress, you would only disturb its growth. In the same way, when you constantly look to the outer world for confirmation, you interrupt the natural unfolding of your inner change. Instead, you remain steady. You return again and again to the state you have chosen. You think from it, you feel from it, you identify with it until it becomes your new normal. And once it is your normal, it no longer requires effort. It simply expresses itself through your life. Because your inner state is not just influencing your reality, it is creating it. Change within, and the world must follow. There comes a moment when understanding is no longer enough, and you must begin to embody what you claim to know. It is one thing to accept that your inner state creates your outer world, but it is another to live from that knowing in a deliberate way. This is where the practice of acting as if becomes essential. Not as a performance for others, not as a forced behavior, but as a quiet inner alignment with the reality you have chosen. To act as if is to think, feel, and move through life from the end you desire, rather than from the conditions you currently see. It is to assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled so completely that it begins to shape your natural responses. You are no longer asking, how do I get there? You are asking, who am I now that I am already there? And from that question, a new version of you begins to emerge. Most people wait. They wait for signs, for proof, for permission from the outer world before they allow themselves to feel successful, confident, secure, or fulfilled. But in waiting, they remain in the very state that keeps their desire out of reach. Acting as if breaks this pattern completely. It removes the need for external validation and places the power back where it belongs within you. When you begin to assume the feeling of your desired reality, something subtle but powerful shifts. Your thoughts begin to align with that assumption. You no longer entertain the same doubts because they do not belong to the person you have chosen to be. Your reactions change because you are no longer responding from lack or uncertainty. Even your decisions begin to reflect this new identity, often without effort. This is not about pretending in the superficial sense. It is not about denying your current circumstances or forcing yourself into unnatural behavior. It is about internal conviction. It is about selecting a state of being and remaining faithful to it, regardless of what your senses may suggest. The outer world may not yet reflect your assumption, but you no longer depend on it for confirmation. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. Your old habits of thinking will attempt to pull you back into previous patterns. You may feel the urge to check, to doubt, to question whether this is truly working. But each time you return to the state of as if, you strengthen it. You make it more real within you. And as it becomes more real internally, it must eventually express itself externally. You must understand that reality does not respond to what you want, it responds to what you are. And when you act as if you are stepping into the version of yourself who already possesses what you desire, you are no longer chasing it, hoping for it, or waiting on it. You are identifying with it now. This identification is what dissolves the distance between you and your desire. Because as long as you see it as something separate from you, something that exists out there, you will continue to experience it as separate. But when you bring it into your sense of self, when you feel it as already yours, you collapse that distance entirely. So you move through your day with a quiet certainty. Not loud, not forced, but steady. You think from your desired reality, you feel from it, and you allow it to shape your natural expression. And without needing to control the outer world, you begin to see it shift in response. Because the moment you become it within, you set in motion the reality that reflects it without. There is a point in this journey where everything becomes remarkably simple, and yet profoundly demanding. It is the moment you realize that nothing changes until you stop accepting what is, not fighting it, not resisting it, but no longer agreeing that it has the final say. Most people live their entire lives within invisible boundaries, not because those boundaries truly exist, but because they have accepted them as facts. They have repeated them, justified them, and ultimately surrendered to them. You hear it in the way people speak. This is just how life is. Things like that don't happen for me. I've always been this way. These are not observations, they are decisions. Quiet decisions that define the limits of their experience. And once a limit is accepted, it begins to organize reality around it. Opportunities are filtered, possibilities are overlooked, and even when change tries to appear, it is dismissed because it does not fit the accepted story. But the moment you withdraw that acceptance, something begins to shift. Not necessarily in the outer world immediately, but within you. And that inner shift is where all transformation begins. You stop asking for permission from your circumstances, and you start giving direction to them. You no longer wait for the world to confirm what is possible, you decide what is possible, and allow the world to catch up. This is where true change is born. Not in effort, not in struggle, but in decision. A clear, unwavering decision about who you are and what you will accept as true for your life. And once that decision is made, you begin to see everything differently. The same conditions that once felt limiting now appear temporary. The same obstacles that once felt overwhelming now seem insignificant, not because they have changed, but because you have. Understand that every limitation in your life has been sustained by agreement. Whether conscious or unconscious, it has been maintained by your continued acceptance of it as reality. So when you decide to no longer accept it, you are not denying its current appearance, you are removing its authority over your future. This requires courage because it asks you to stand in a new identity before there is any visible proof. It asks you to trust what you have chosen within, even when everything outside suggests otherwise. But this is the very act that breaks the cycle. This is what separates those who remain bound by circumstances from those who transform them. You begin to live from a new standard. You no longer tolerate thoughts that contradict your chosen identity. You no longer entertain stories that reinforce limitation. You become selective, not in a forceful way, but in a natural way. Because once you know that your acceptance shapes your reality, you become careful about what you accept. And in this awareness, you reclaim your power. You realize that change is not something you wait for, it is something you decide. It does not require perfect conditions, perfect timing, or perfect understanding. It requires only that you stop agreeing with what you no longer wish to experience and start aligning with what you do. From that moment on, everything begins to reorganize, not because you forced it, but because you no longer sustain the old pattern. The limits lose their hold, the old reflections begin to fade, and a new reality starts to take shape. Because the moment you stop accepting the limits, you begin to live beyond them.